So, I know Mark. Mark and I have done things together on various projects, and we also did some stuff with the military. And he said to me, look, would you like to come up and maybe give a talk on management, motivation and leadership? And I said, delighted, and it's fortunate it's come together. When I was thinking about this today, I was thinking, well, we're in all this kind of doom and gloom at the moment with, the health service on its knees, a lot of agony out there and all the rest of it, and a lot of people talking about the good old days. And I've got a little piece of film. It's only about a minute long. Anybody here from Gravesend in Kent?
No, we're very close.
Where?
Bexley.
Well, there you go. If you've got a grandmother in nursing, this may well be your lucky day or her unlucky day. And I just thought to maybe lighten the load that I'd talk to you about, show this piece of film from Gravesend in 1948, which is actually before I was born, and it was on the eve of the NHS coming into existence. And it was what the hospital in Gravesend were trying to do to recruit nurses, because surprise, surprise, there was a shortfall in nurses. So the young lady over there is my new best friend, who's not going to let me down. Janet, can we show Gravesend?
I hope so.
Do you know it worked at 10:30, didn't it?
It did. Oh, there you go.
Trip south to Gravesend. Meet two of the town's hospital nurses, Mara Gossip from Orpington and Durham's Gladys Barker. Today is their day off. They share a home away from the hospital. Both have their own front door key. Their leisure hours are kept free from the hospital atmosphere. In the morning, still off duty till 10 o'clock, they have breakfast in bed brought in by the maid. Matron Vernon knows that all these homely trifles assure her of a contented staff. And happy nurses speed the recovery of the patients. The new smartly designed uniform brightens the sick room. It is now being issued in place of the cumbersome and uncomfortable old design. There are 30,000 vacancies for girls in hospitals throughout the country. Here at Gravesend, makeup and lipstick are not frowned upon when the staff goes on duty. Of Britain's 80,000 nurses, they think they are the luckiest.
So, there you go. So Bev, like, you do some bit of breakfast in bed, makeup, lipstick, and all that.
Oh, lovely with that bit.
Absolutely. But there is a poignant note in that piece, because it seems incredible, really, doesn't it? Maids and breakfast in bed and all this kind of business. But 1948, there were 80,000 nurses, there were 30,000 vacancies. So it just goes to show you that some things don't change, and I just thought that might lighten the load a bit in this day and age. So, Janet, can we have the presentation? Right. So, Mark said to me, can I come and talk to you about motivation, management and leadership? Is there a clicker that I can do with? Is that it? Yeah, it is. Okay, this is what I want to do. I want to walk through a series of slides and concepts, and I'm going to give time for questions at the end. And if anybody wants this, my email is at the bottom, so if you take my email address, I'll ping it to you, or I'll give it to Bev or whatever, because I always know that there's always at least a few people saying, really interesting, I'd like a copy of it. Because one of the things that you try to do when you're motivating and managing and leading people is to share knowledge and information. So it's not my presentation, it's a presentation that I want to share with you. Now, I'll open at the start by saying there's a very good management and there's a lot of very good leadership. Okay, so at one end of the spectrum, you can find some really good stuff. At the other end of the spectrum, I'm sorry to say, there are some challenges. And in a complex organisation, like an NHS trust or indeed any other setting, people often confuse management with leadership. And what I intend to, yes, it works. So you've got managers versus leaders, and on this column it's about managers, and this column is about leadership. Now, because of time, I want to run through it because there's a lot we've got to cover. But leaders are people that inspire people. And if you look up here, the people that are just possessed with management are possessed with doing the right things. Why are we doing it? We're doing it because we've been told to do it. Whereas leaders are possessed with doing the right things. What should we be doing? And the column, which I say, I'm not going to go through in every one of them, but just to pick out some. Managers and bureaucrats, they administer, they imitate, and they maintain. Leaders innovate, they originate, they develop, they take people with them. Managers focus on structures, leaders focus on people. Because of course there's a place for the structure, we know that, and everybody's got a place in the structure. But what leaders do is focus on the individuals, the people that are in there that actually make it work. It's never the structure that makes it work. It's never the rule book that makes it work. It's whether or not you've got the people that actually end up bringing people along in order to make things happen. Managers rely on control, leaders inspire trust. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, you know, I've been around a long time now, Chief Executive Central and North West London Trust for 12 years, Chief Executive of the RCN for 9 years, but before that was a Director of Operations. I've had some great bosses, some great leaders, some people that have taught me a lot of stuff, but I've also had at times people you think, my God, you know, I mean, this is really poor management, and no wonder things can't get done around here, because what we've got are people that are obsessed with control freaks. You know, and it's often a male characteristic, which sadly some women feel the need to emulate in order to prove that they're managers. But you know, you ever work that type of person? Don't bring me solutions. Don't bring me problems, bring me solutions. That is a pathetic way to operate. If someone's got some problems, someone's got some issues, what good leaders do is they say, tell me, what are your issues? What are the pinch points? What are you struggling with? How can I help? Not, I'm the boss, and the boss may not always be right, but the boss is the boss. That is no way to lead and inspire people. Managers have a short-range view. You know, they get through each day. The leaders have the long-term perspective. And just something, because I'm not going to go through them all, but something for you to be very aware of. Managers are what I call classic good soldiers. This is where they tend to, you know, the boss says, this is what we're going to do, and we're going to do it. So if somebody says, hey, but hang on a minute, did we not tell the boss that that's not practical? Now, these people just follow it slavishly. Whereas leaders are prepared to ask what and why. And many of you in this room will be in positions of authority, where you have authority over individuals. Some of you are on your way up. But one of the key things is always be prepared to listen to everybody in the team. Because most people, when they come to work, they want to do a good job. And most people are prepared to contribute. And so what good leaders are prepared to do is to listen to what everybody has to say. Sometimes their ideas may not be properly thought through. Sometimes they may not be practical. But you give people a voice and you give them some airspace and you hear what they have to say. Managers often struggle with that. We're doing it because we've been told to do it. Leaders ask what and why. Now, if you're in a position of authority and you can manage people, been around Becky's unit this morning, you actually have power. Now, there's nothing wrong with the word power, but it's how do you use that power? Do you use it to get into command and control, or do you use it to liberate and empower people? Now, the sort of person that gets into a managerial position and is insecure tends to rely on command and control. I am the boss. The person that feels comfortable in their skin is able to say, right, I am the boss, or I am the leader, I am the whatever, but I want to have a culture where people feel empowered and they feel liberated to contribute and to challenge. So, what are the characteristics? The power people, strength, control, authority, acceptance of authority, and competitiveness. Now, I do a lot of mentoring for people in middle and senior management roles. And one of the things I point out to people is, with the acceptance of authority, you will have people that are accountable to you that are only always too ready to agree with you. And that can be very seductive, because you think, oh yeah, they're always cooperating, they're always agreeing, and you know, whatever we say, they go with. The type of people that operate like that accept authority, tend to be what I would say obsequious going up the line, or creeping, for the want of a better word. And these people, by nature, then tend to be quite bullying and harassing down the line. And I've found that as a characteristic over the years. And that's why, when you're in a managerial position, somebody that's shining might actually be dazzling you. So you've got to be very careful to get under the skin of who is accountable to you and how they're operating with you. Whereas the power the power to liberate, these are the managers, the leaders, that first of all inspire trust. I don't at all apologise for using the word caring, because if you're responsible for people, you've got to care for them. You've got to take an interest in them. I've never subscribed to the theory that, look, when you come to work, you leave your personal problems at the door. Life isn't like that. And if somebody's got some issues going on in their personal life, marital problems, a child ill, or whatever, the idea that the day they cross the threshold into the ward and the department, that goes away, simply isn't real. And equally, I'd say the converse, because I've known people that have said that they've had difficulties when they go home, because their husband, wife, partner says, look, I'm not interested in your pressures at work, you know, that stays at work. Life isn't like that. And what good leaders do is they tune in and they care for their staff, they show concern of their staff. They also have knowledge of content and process. And what I mean by that is that you will at some stage come across somebody that's in charge of a ward, a department, or whatever, but don't actually understand what's going on. And that was one of the big problems in the late 80s with the emergence of general management, when Margaret Thatcher thought it was a great idea to bring people in from Sainsbury's and all the rest of it. And, you know, there's a lot we can learn from these people, but a lot of the people that came in didn't actually understand what they were looking at. And as a consequence, and particularly clinical staff, felt very alienated by it. And whilst of course there is a role for people that come up through a pure managerial channel, over the years I've found that where you get the mixed economy of people that might have been a physio, a nurse, an OT, a psychologist, a radiographer, actually can bring far more to the party, because they understand the environment in which you're working. So knowledge of content and process. Leaders have good communication skills. You've got to be able to communicate. You've got to be able to speak in language that people understand, and good group skills, and you've got to respect people. Now, so what do leaders need to do? Communicate, more listening and understanding, less talking. So when you go around, it's no good saying, I take it you're happy in your job. No, no, no. Do open questions, okay? What are the issues? What are your challenges? You know, what are your frustrations? Hear what people have got to say, and surprise, surprise, people will usually have something constructive to say that helps with the challenges. Now, visible management, walk the patch, be a role model. Now, when I was at the Royal College of Nursing, we covered this briefly this morning, I made a point of getting out and visiting nurses in the workplace. And most of those visits went really well. But occasionally, you would come across a situation with a director of nursing, and there are lots and lots of very good directors of nursing, so let's get this right. But occasionally, you'd go around a hospital, and for those of you that are members of the Royal College of Nursing, unfortunately you'd have got the bulletin, it's got my mugshot in it, I used to have. So you've maybe gone to a ward, and this has happened many times, where the ward sister, staff nurse, oh, Peter Carter, and all the rest of it, and then they'd kind of look, and then you'd realise, someone like a ward sister doesn't realise the person with you is their director of nursing. Now you might find that astonishing, but that has happened, and not just on a one-off occasion. Now again, I just want to reiterate, most directors of nursing, it wouldn't happen at all. They would know their staff, know their wards, particularly know their ward sisters. And I would never embarrass a director of nursing, but after the visit, at the end of it, like alone in the office, I'd say something like, look, you don't know your staff, they don't know you. So how can you possibly inspire them, lead them, motivate them, hear about their issues? If you're isolated, oh, I've got so much paperwork to do, I don't do it. And I'd say no. You know, if you want to lead these people and motivate them, you've got to be a good role model. You've got to be visible. You've got to walk the patch. They've got to know you. Now, they are difficult jobs, and I've been in those jobs, but you've got to build in time to get to know people. Facilitate risk-taking, build trust and confidence. Again, some of the things I've been hearing this morning is about change management. And you can only do that by making people feel that they trust you and that they feel confident in you. And then they are more likely to accept new change and new ideas because they feel that the person that's leading them is someone that they feel confident with and that they trust. And then there's a difference between delegation and abdication. And you know, you get a difficult job, you're in a senior management position, crikey, how are we going to do this? Well, let's give it some poor so-and-so down the line. That's not good. That's not good. What it's about doing is, again, helping people, and don't shunt your problems onto other people. Because if there's something you don't understand, it's highly likely that your subordinate will not understand. Pay attention to the detail. Learn to work the problem. Any organisation, again, whether it's a unit, a ward, a hospital, a whole trust, at times there will be problems. Things will emerge that were unenvisaged. And it's about, okay, we have a difficulty here. Now, what are we going to do about it? And it's a phrase I use a lot. Learn to work the problem. Talk to the people. Bring people in to who you think is best placed to help solve this. And it's also about networking and political awareness. Now, two people here who, some of you are far too young to remember Ronald Reagan. He was around about 30 years ago before you were born. He was a former president of the United States. The gentleman on your left is Tony Hayward, who's the former chief executive of British Petroleum. Now, why am I showing you these two things? These are two case studies of two, I think, really fascinating people. By the way, it's Trump getting elected, I'm going to have to rethink this through. Now, Ronald Reagan was what we used to call years ago a B-movie actor, which again, you're nodding and you can't possibly remember it. There was a time when you went to the pictures, as well as the main picture, there would be a film before it, which is known as B-movie, a very cheap movie. And Ronald Reagan was a B-movie actor. Well, good luck to him. Anyway, in the 1970s, he became governor of California. And California is a very interesting state. We were there recently, weren't we? Becky and I know each other from California. That'll get the tongues wagging, won't it? Anyway, in California, anybody can end up being the governor because it's such a rich and wealthy state. It doesn't really matter. What's his name at the moment? Arnold Schwarzenegger. He's the current governor. Okay. So Reagan, B-movie actor, puts in, becomes the governor, and everything was going fine. And then the presidential elections came up, and he put his hat in the ring and was initially seen as a joke candidate, like Trump was. And he was like, oh, he'll never make president of the United States. But the 1970s, a very difficult decade for America. They had been kicked out of Vietnam, a war they should have never been involved in, and that was a humiliation. The dollar was struggling because of the oil crisis. And in 1978, a load of students broke into the embassy in Tehran and took over 100 Americans hostage for over a year. So this massive, wealthy country with all of that military might was unable to do anything about it. And America was feeling very, very demoralized, okay? Because up until then, most things they touched in their short history had been a success. And it was my namesake, Jimmy Carter, was the president of the United States, and he just didn't have a clue what to do. Reagan got the nomination to contest the presidential election against Jimmy Carter, and he swept to victory. Now here's the interesting thing about Reagan. Reagan, God rest his soul, was not actually a very intelligent man. But how did he end up getting there? Because he was a great communicator, and he spoke language that people understood and could relate to. And he used to say the kinds of things that Trump is saying, you know, those students in Tehran, if I get elected, they're looking down a barrel of a gun. Those are the kinds of things he said. And it captured a note in America. But his knowledge of things like the economy was really, really low. And there was this famous example where when he was trying to get the nomination to be elected, a Wall Street Journal, this is the financial journal in America, the editor of the Wall Street Journal said to one of the chief financial reporters, listen, you better get on a plane out to California, interview Ronald Reagan, and ask him what he's going to do about the problems in the economy. And the reporter, you know, tired of the back, said, oh, this guy's never going to get elected. And the guy and the editor said, look, just get your butt down to California, interview him, otherwise the next thing we'll be seeing is that, you know, we're not giving him any airspace. So the guy goes down, and this is a financial journalist, sits down and says, Governor Reagan, you're aspiring to be the President of the United States. And he asked him a number of technical questions about the fiscal deficit in the American economy. And it was quite a technical question. And he asked him about his fiduciary responsibilities, which is what comes with the turf. If you're the president, you've got to manage this economy. And the guy's looking at Reagan, and Reagan's kind of glazing over. And so he said, so what are you going to do about the economy if you get elected? And Reagan said, now you listen here. If your ma has got 6 kids and she bakes a blueberry pie, how many ways does she cut it? And I was thinking, what's he talking about? He said, well, I'll tell you how. He cuts it 9 ways. 1 piece of pie for each of the 6 kids, the other 2 for ma and pa, and the 9th piece, that's held in reserve in case a stranger comes up. And that's what we're going to do with the economy. We're going to cut it even ways, and we're going to get a bit in reserve for the rainy day. It was rubbish. It was absolute rubbish. I was like, God, guess what? The American people loved it. This is this guy. He didn't talk in technicalities. He didn't talk about the Dow Jones Index. He talked in a way, and people thought, yeah, that's that kind of guy. And what happened was, he got the nomination, he got swept to power, and he was known as the great communicator because he spoke the language that people knew. Now, Tony Hayward was the chief executive of BP. Now, Tony Hayward, for any of you that follow this, is a man whose reputation has been absolutely trashed. You will remember about 4 years ago, there was that massive oil leak off the coast of Florida. And it went on for months. BP, it ruptured, and it literally spewed out billions, not millions, billions of gallons of oil, and it devastated part of the Florida coastline. the devastation to marine life was phenomenal and will take decades and decades to recover. And a lot of small businesses, you know, fishing, trawlers, all kinds of entertainment things, went out of business because it had completely shattered the local economy. Now, I actually think Tony Hayward is a good and decent man, and he's an incredibly intelligent man. I mean, what this man didn't know about physics and the oil industry isn't worth knowing. However, you put him in front of a camera, and he was absolutely hopeless. He talked in technical terms, and he would lack unintentionally any empathy with the people and the marine life that had been devastated. And he would talk about things like, well, this was unforeseeable, as opposed to saying, look, I am really sorry this has happened. We didn't want this to happen. The last thing we wanted was to be losing billions of gallons of oil. But he showed no warmth, he showed no empathy, because in front of the cameras, he froze. And for those of you who are interested in this stuff, and there's usually somebody, if you go on to YouTube, you can get clips. When he had to appear before the Senate committee, where they were wanting some answers to questions, he was doing things like looking at his watch. He didn't realise what he was doing, but it was like, you know, get me out of here. He actually said at one stage, look, I can't wait to get my life back together. And people said, you can't wait to get your life back together. You're earning $6 million a year. What about the poor fishermen that are out of work? So there's no empathy at all. And in my experience, the people that are most successful are the people that have the fusion between the two. Tony Hayward, as I say, a good and decent man, but didn't understand or empathise with what was going on with the people that had lost their businesses, let alone the devastation of marine life. Ronald Reagan, as I say, didn't have the intellect, but he was compassionate, and he showed warmth. You know, a few years ago, by the way, this isn't let's take a pop at American presidents, but do you remember when the name of the city's New Orleans? Remember there were the floods? And there's this infamous picture of George Bush in the presidential jet. Do you remember this? He's looking out the window down at it, and people say, my God, you know, what is this? He flew over it. You know what Ronald Reagan would have done? He'd have been there in welly boots, standing up there with a shovel, and saying, we've got to all dig in here and help out. And in my experience, the people that are most successful are the people that have got the intellectual understanding of what's going on, but you marry it up with the warmth, the empathy, and you speak the language of people. So, in terms of motivation and morale, organisations. Organisations are a series of microclimates. I was the chief executive, as I said, at CNWL. Every now and then you get some dignitary around or something, and they'd say, how's morale? And being slightly awkward, I'd say, look, that is an absurd question. You know, at CNWL we covered a big part of London. You know, 6 London boroughs, something like 7,000 staff, about 100 sites, some of them small clinics, some of them big 300-bedded inpatient. I said, do you seriously think I can sit here and just pronounce that morale is excellent, good, average, poor, whatever? No, life isn't like that. I said, what I think is, overall, I think morale is pretty good. But in any large, complex organisation, at any given time, somewhere, something will not be good. You know, you could, let's say, you've got a very, very experienced ward sister who's taken ill, goes off sick, long-term sick leave, morale will drop on the ward. Why? Because they've lost their leader. And although the replacement might come in or someone might act up, things can get shaky. Equally, there could have been an unfortunate incident, you know, a patient dying, something really horrible happening. I mean, some of you will have seen in the newspapers recently, in an A&E department, they were so overwhelmed that they put an elderly woman into, I think it was a storeroom, and she was on a drip. They forgot about her, and she strangled herself. She's dead. She's strangled on a drip. Now, it's a terrible, terrible incident. I can guarantee you the morale in that department will be on its knees. People will be devastated by it. And not to mention, of course, the primary people that will be devastated will be the woman's family and all the rest of it. So if you're interested in motivation and morale, what you've got to always be aware of, at any given time, somewhere, something will not be right. So rather than adding it all up and saying, morale here is good or average or very good, say, look, overall I think it's fine, but we've got some hotspot areas and we're prepared to talk about those hotspot areas and we're prepared to look into them. Because you're only as good as your weakest link. And what you've got to be prepared to do is to come to terms with the fact that large, complex organisations employing huge numbers of staff, at any given time there will be somebody somewhere who's not very happy about something. Now sometimes that unhappiness is unreasonable and you say, well, I'm sorry, you know, I know you're a band 5 and you think you should be an AA, but I'm sorry, it ain't going to work, right? And you give people a straight, I'm using an absurd, well, is it absurd? I don't know. But you are prepared to engage with people to understand their issues. Now, one size does not fit all. Know your people. Some of you, again, you know, as you go through your careers, you might end up where you're in an interview, say, tell me about your managerial style. You know, what is it? And I was always very careful with those questions to say, well, I've got a style, I've got some certain characteristics, but part of my style is to know and understand the people that I'm working with. Because you see, there are some people that need very direct instructions. And if you kind of flower it up a bit, they kind of don't get it. I don't know how many of you follow rugby, and God forbid any of you are prop forwards or married to prop forward, but prop forwards tend to need very direct messages without too much embroidery, often with some 4 and 7 letter swear words, and they get it, okay? If you kind of say, look, would you mind, as I come in too tight now, they don't get it. Whereas a standoff, if you do that to them and give them very blunt messages, it kind of unnerves them a bit. And I remember playing this team where the captain was a bricklayer, and his style changed on who he was talking with. And people might think bricklayer isn't sophisticated. Actually, this guy was a brilliant manager, because there are some players, you give them a grade A rollicking, all you do is make them more nervous, and they get even worse. There are other people, if you don't actually give them that kind of, look, come on, sort yourself out, they don't get it. So it's about know your people. And I was mentoring a person who remained anonymous, of course. She was incredibly talented. In fact, she was gifted. But her big problem was that she could not let go when she asked somebody to do something. And so, you know, give someone a very clear set of instructions. Sarah, this is what we're going to do, da-da-da-da, and you let them get on with it and say, come back to me if you need to ask anything. What she would then do is give them the instructions, give them the kind of way forward, and then constantly interfere. And I was trying to get through to her, and I said, look, and again, you try to fish for kind of easy examples that you can relate to. I said, look, if you ran a really successful fish and chip shop and you were making a lot of money, you'd still get into difficulties because you would want to know the field where the potatoes were planted in that made the chips. I said, that's no way to manage. What you've got to do is, you've got to trust people. You've got to let people get on with it. You've got to know your people. Now, I want to give you a case study. And the one I'm going to use is this. When I got my first management position, it's quite sort of junior, I shared an office for a while with a guy who had a very different background to me. He's a really, really nice guy. I got on so well with him. And he'd been to public school, and he'd been to Cambridge, and he studied anthropology, and he got a first. So if you get the picture, a really intelligent man with that background, and for some reason that I didn't quite understand, why would you, after being to one of the country's best public schools and Cambridge, why would you want to come and do NHS management? But he did. And he went on the graduate trainee scheme, and he started, and I say shared an office for a while, and he was constantly interfering with things. You know that you've heard that adage, if it ain't broken, don't mend it, yeah? And he was always getting it wrong. And I said to him, you know, why are you doing this? And he said, because I'm looking at ways of improving things. And one particular scheme when it all went truly pear-shaped was he was in charge of all the facilities, porters, domestics, switchboard and all the rest of it. And he was working on something, and I didn't quite what it was. And then he said, I've got this plan. He said, the way in which the food is distributed around the hospital, I think there's a better way of doing it. And I remember saying to him, I didn't think there was a problem. He said, well, it's not a problem, but we can actually do this better. And I think we can actually save on portering staff. And I should have kind of tuned in a bit more and said something like, have you talked to anybody about this? Anyway, he said to me, you know, he was quite frank, he said, look, you always seem to kind of be able to communicate with people. Could you come along to the meeting with me? And then perhaps afterwards tell me a bit about my style and all the rest of it. So I said, fine. So we all went to this meeting, and he called a meeting of all the portering staff. So they're all there, including the head porter and the deputy head porter. And he stood up in front of these porters, and he had it all up on his, in those days we used transparencies, you know, all beautifully done. And he said, gentlemen, I have been doing an analysis of the methodology you deploy for the distribution of food, and I have to say it's counterintuitive. So I said, let's see. What the hell is he on about? And the head porter, what really was a guy called Bert, who always had a fag in nose, because in those days people said, and I thought, oh crikey, he hasn't run this past Bert, you know. Anyway, he said, look, we're going to change the way in which we distribute food. Any questions? Silence. So he said, well, that's very good. He said, well, we'll start tomorrow. He said, we won't do it for the breakfast, but tomorrow lunchtime. And it was one of these hospitals that had a big main building, but a series of outer buildings, all on kind of different levels, a bit of a sort of hodgepodge of Nissen huts and big building. And as you will know, in those hospitals there's a battery-operated truck and there's a wagon train that goes around and they dish off the various trolleys. So it all kicked off. Absolute chaos. Absolute chaos. And bleeps started going, phones started going, because the route on paper did look more efficient, but there were things you didn't realise. Because of the rabbit warren way of the hospital, there were some inclines that the battery-operated truck couldn't get up. So there's the reporters. They knew this, but they let him walk into a trap. And people were ringing, Ward Sisters, where's the food? And it's stuck somewhere. On the same day was the day when the wagon train used to swing past the pharmacy, and the pharmacy used to put on the drug boxes, and that was again a way of dropping them off. So the head pharmacist was ringing up saying, listen, when are you going to come and pick these drugs up? And it was just chaos. Paul, the guy, head in his hand, oh my God. And the hospital administrator burst in and wanted to know what was going on. And what was going on was it was chaos. He called the head porter in, and the head porter said, look, I got called to a meeting yesterday with my men. And he said, well, you didn't talk to Bert? And he said, well, no. And he said he was going to do this, right, he's the boss, let him get on with it. You see, they let him walk into a trap, but it was a trap of his own making. Now, they shouldn't have done it, but that's what happens when you assume that you know better than the people doing the job. And that was the very first time I realised the difference between intelligence and experience. So you imagine, Cambridge, first-class honours degree, really bright, and a really nice man. Bert, and I hope this doesn't sound like I'm pigeonhole him, was a stereotypical head porter, not very sophisticated, but by golly, that man knew how to run a portering service in a hospital. And that's why I say you should know your staff, but also don't assume that just because people are on a lower pay grade and may not have your background, they don't know what's going on, because believe me, they do. Now, summary. Clarity of corporate objectives. Visibility, walk the job. Learn to walk the problem. Be impartial. The worst mistake you can ever make as a manager is to assume my direct report's right or wrong. Equity. Treat people the same. Treat people as you wish to be treated, okay, and don't differentiate. There's nothing worse when people set a standard and then when somebody quite senior doesn't follow it, that you end up with making accommodations for that individual that you wouldn't make for others. And the example I will give you is this. Again, suitably anonymised. When I was at the Royal College of Nursing, I used to visit a lot. I went to this hospital and a senior nurse said, right now Peter, we're going to walk around wards and need to bear from the elbow and all the rest of it, just as Bev did this morning. And of course you do. Of course you. But this guy, then, because I was like taking my jacket off, said, because here I set the highest possible standards, and I'm sorry if you feel uncomfortable. I said, no, look, can't you see I'm wrong? I said, yeah, but I really set these standards. Please spare me, you know. Anyway, so I thought, you know, I'm really going to enjoy this morning walking around this guy. So off we go. And first thing, he really irritated me because we took shortcuts through wards without kind of saying good morning to people or whatever. And I thought, how rude is that? To think you can, just because you're a senior manager, you can walk through somebody's ward. And I felt bad about it. Anyway, the first ward we got to was a surgical ward. And the ward sister, talking away, and there was a time when I was at the college, you know, quite a big media profile, and the ward sister said, oh, Mr. So-and-so, one of the surgeons, says he'd really like to meet you. I said, oh, that's nice. And they said, you know, he's asked, can we call you when you call him when you arrive? So could be guy. She said, oh yeah, I'll come up. This guy came up, and I'd written something in one of the newspapers, and he just said, and it was very complimentary. So I really enjoyed that, and we had a chat. But this guy had a three-piece suit on, waistcoat, tie, all the rest of it, and the senior manager, who was so kind of up himself and so kind of smug about setting the standards, obviously didn't know the surgeon was that person. And I probably shouldn't have done this, but I couldn't resist it. I said, listen, I see you got your suit on, and you know you're not bare from the elbow. Oh, he's that bloody rubbish. You know, I don't take any notice of that. And if anybody wanted to and the guy did look suitably embarrassed. And later on, again when we were alone, I said to him, you know, I said, you really got on my nerves when you were preaching to the converted. I said, but you were doing that in front of some of your colleagues. We then go around this ward, here's a surgeon, and because he's a surgeon, you don't say to him, excuse me, we've got a policy. You make an accommodation, whereas a care assistant, you'd have probably wiped the floor with them. You see what I mean? About if you want to be a leader, you want to motivate, because there are very few leaders, but there's a lot of you. And people will watch you and they'll say, oh yeah, oh Mr. Big Shot, I noticed he didn't say that to Mr. So-and-so. And that's why, if you want to be a leader, you've got to be equitable. You've got to know your staff, and you've got to know your agenda. And don't be afraid to admit when you're wrong. The worst thing you can ever do is embark on something, and when it's going a bit pear-shaped, is think, I cannot now change this because we've started on it and I'm going to lose face. You will lose more face by persevering with something that's not working. And the final thing I would say, value people, because valued people make effective teams. If you're feeling part of it, if you're feeling valued, you will contribute. Now, we've got about 10 minutes left, and just a couple of things I want to share with you, and then I want to finish with something. There's been a lot of talk over the past few years about health staff lacking compassion, about people in the health service perhaps losing their edge. And a few years ago, there was an initiative, and it came out in the national newspapers, that people like nurses and others were going to be taught to be compassionate. Remember all this kind of stuff that came out? I really objected to that, because first of all, I think it's absolutely absurd to think you can teach compassion. Compassion is an innate quality that most people have, obviously to varying degrees. What you should look at is why is it that some people lose their compassion? And I think you'll find where you get problems is where someone has been left perhaps in the same ward for 10, 15, 20, 25 years or department, understaffed, overworked and undervalued, and all of the kind of values that they came into, physiotherapy or OT or medicine or nursing, over the years, excuse me, get eroded. So I don't go down the route that first of all health workers have lost their compassion. They have not lost their compassion. They've got it in bucketfuls. Is there a drink of water around? Do you mind? So I want to give you an example of, this is an absolute real account of something that happened with a friend of mine. And I think it really encapsulates the beauty of nursing and compassion. Oh, hiya. Right, this friend of mine was one of 6 children. And a very good, very happy upbringing. And their mother died several years ago. And their dad had a very good life and lived well into his 80s. And out of the blue, he was taken seriously ill, admitted to hospital, and went downhill very, very quickly. And it became quite clear that he wasn't going to survive. And my friend Claire and her 5 brothers and sisters all had a great relationship with their dad, and it was very distressing. On a Saturday, that was the eve of Father's Day, they were really struggling because their father kept going in and out of consciousness. And Claire said to her 5 brothers and sisters, why don't we each get a Father's Day card and perhaps write our thoughts about Dad, and that might help us, even though he's, losing consciousness. And they went off to the hospital shop, bought 6 cards, and brilliant, thank you. See, compassion. He didn't say get your own water. Anyway, so they wrote the 6 cards, put the 6 cards on the bedside locker, sat with their dad until quite late at night, and they all left about 11 o'clock. Went home. Claire had a restless night, and she woke up about 5 o'clock in the morning and thought she would go down to the hospital and sit with her dad. So she went down and got there about 6 o'clock and said to one of the nurses, do you mind if I go and sit with my dad? And the nurse said, no, fine. And she walked down the ward, and as she got to the bay where her dad was, the curtain immediately facing had been drawn. So she thought, that's a bit odd. So as she looked around the curtain, the first thing she saw was the locker, which the previous night had the 6 cards on, and the cards were missing. And she was really taken aback. And she looked, and there was a nurse sitting there. And she said to the nurse, where are my dad's Father's Day cards? And the nurse said, look, your dad briefly woke up, and I took the opportunity to read all 6 cards to him. Was that all right? And Claire said, absolutely, that was all right. And her father went back into unconsciousness, and a few hours later died with his 6 children around him. And they derived huge comfort from knowing that some of the last words that he heard were the 6 beautiful tributes from the 6 children. So if you think about that act, was it a key performance indicator? Was it a target? Did anybody tell the nurse to do it? Of course they didn't. What was it? It was a real act of compassion. And that kind of thing goes on day in, day out, unheralded, unseen. And perhaps if Claire hadn't turned up, she might never have known that that act took place, because the nurse wouldn't have traded off it, wouldn't have written it in the notes or anything. So please can you be with me when you hear people talking about where is nursing and physio and OT and all the rest of it gone wrong, you know, why aren't they are compassionate. But sometimes it goes wrong because it's been drained out. Now, before my voice finally gives up, I want to show you something that people often say to me, have you got any references about motivation, management, leadership, organisational behaviour, you know, Harvard Business School and all this stuff? Well, there are absolutely tons and tons and tons of that stuff out there. But I love the David Attenborough programs. Yeah? Anybody see them? Yeah? A few nods around the table. Anybody a mental health nurse here? No? Good, because this is the bit where you think I miss my lunchtime medication. Okay, so stick with me. I'm going to show you some lessons for life from the world of geese. Yeah? Right. Okay, with me? Stick with me. It's, you know, it's a bit off the wall, but stick with me. Right. Can we have our lessons from geese? Please, Janet. Okay. Now, 4 lessons of life from the world of geese. By the way, the first time I wrote this, I didn't test it and the geese flew in backwards. So it didn't inspire the audience. Right. Now, geese, as you know, fly in a V formation. Now, by flying together in the V formation, the flying range increases by a massive 71%. So by doing it together, you can go a hell of a lot further than you would do if you were flying alone. What's the lesson for teamwork? By significant coordination and working together, the productivity rate, the efficiency rate is increased dramatically. But how do they do this? Right. The V is known as a scheme. And the next time you follow, September's a usually good time for this because they're all flying off to a nice warmer climate. You follow over the evening sky a skein of geese. And guess what happens? They rotate. Because the reason they can go so much further is the geese at the front, particularly the first 3, are expending a lot of energy as they're fighting against the elements. But as it goes back through, the ones at the back, if you look carefully, are hardly expending any energy. Why? It's a bit like the racing car drivers. They're in the slipstream. But, to put it very inelegantly, it's not left to the 3 poor sods who happen to be at the front. So, well, Bert at the front, he's clapping himself out. No. Geese have worked this out. If we rotate, we share the workload, we share the burden, and then we go so much further. So, what's the lesson for teamwork? Workload should be evenly distributed. Too much reliance should never be placed on an individual. You know the old adage, if you want something done, give it to a busy person? Great. And health workers tend to have that characteristic, but the trouble is, you can get burnt out. And that's not very clever at all. Now, lesson 3. Now, geese make a honking noise, and I once gave this talk, and someone at the back honked out, and so if you know how to do that, feel free to do so. It is not mindless gaggle. The honking is a very sophisticated communication system. It comes from the back of the scheme and goes to the front and back again. And what happens is that the geese are looking for food, for water, for danger, for somewhere to sleep for the night. So at any given time, the whole of that team, the whole of that scheme, knows the state of play. Now, I've already said several times, I've come across a lot of good management, but I also at times come across situations of very poor management. And one of the most infamous examples was some members of the Royal College of Nursing working in a hospital up north were going home on the evening bus are going on with the bus and they've got a free evening paper, and somebody opened it and said, hey look, there's an article here about some of our wards are going to close. The Trust had come up with a plan to close some wards, and the first those people knew about it was when they read about it in the evening paper. Now, isn't that a shocking way to treat people? I mean, for all I know, the plan might have been a sensible plan, but surely the first people you speak to are the people that are working. You do not find out about it by the evening paper. So, lesson for leadership. Communication is critical to ensure effective teamwork and leadership. You've got to let people know what's going on, where it's going on, and how it's going on. And the final lesson is this. If a goose is wounded or is unwell and has to leave the scheme and fly to the ground, 2 other geese will leave the scheme, they will fly to the ground, and they will stay with the distressed goose until the goose has either recovered or died. They will never leave their distressed companion. Now, if a goose recovers, and it can take days, they will wait for another scheme to come, and they'll go up and join in the scheme, and they tuck in at the back, and the scheme knows there's been a problem, and they don't rotate until they feel ready. If a goose dies, and the scheme sees 2 geese flying up, they know that a goose has died. The honking becomes a very set of soothing sounds. The 2 again tuck in at the back, and they don't rotate until they're ready. Now, working in health is a very rewarding job, but it can be stressful. It can, at times, affect people both physically and psychologically. Just think about this for a sophisticated support system. A goose is unwell and has to fly to the ground. The scheme then looks, oh, well, look at that. Why do 2 fly down? Well, 2 fly down so that one can go and forage for food and be a companion to the distressed goose. But if the goose has died, then that carer is not left alone. So what I would say is that whilst, say, Harvard Business School, all these kind of things, there's loads of management techniques, you might find it a bit trite, but to support each other is absolutely paramount. So the lesson for leadership, the need to be supportive and sensitive to the needs of others, particularly in times of crisis, is paramount. Working in the health service generally, and nursing specifically, and I apologise for those of you who are not nurses, but it's the same principle. It can be a highly pressurised and stressful occupation. The need to support each other has never been greater. Don't think that support is something that Bev does. Of course she does it. But as you go through the echelons now, we all need to support each other. We all need to be looking out for each other and helping people through. And I've absolutely loved my time in the health service and at the Royal College of Nursing. And a lot of people have helped me, and I like to think along the way I've helped people. And what I would do is I would offer some lessons from the world of geese, and if you can take them with you, it just might help you get through the day. Okay, well, that concludes what I have to say. Thank you.